أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إنا أعطيناك الكوثر فصل لربك وانحر إن شانئك هو الأبتر.
Organized by the Management School of Beharia and the Maritime School, Maritime and Applied Sciences School of Beharia University. I will now request Professor Dr. Liaquat Ali, Principal, Beharia Business School, to come and present his welcoming speech. Sir.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Honorable Director General, Karachi Campus, Rear Admiral Retired Muhammad Zubair Shafiq, Hilali Imtiaz Military, esteemed international trainers, distinguished guests from different industries, participants, faculty members, students, ladies and gentlemen. Assalamu alaikum, good morning. On behalf of Beharia Business School, Karachi Campus, and Beharia School of Maritime and Applied Sciences, it is a pleasure and privilege for me to welcome you all to this corporate training program organized under the umbrella of 5th International Summer School at Karachi Campus. This event reveals Beharia University's commitment to contribute in socio-economic development of the country through skill development, education, and academic excellence. This is also an effort to bridge the gap between academia and industry. Topic of this summer school is well aligned with vision and mission of Beharia University and with vision and mission of Beharia Business School, as well as School of Maritime and Applied Sciences. This is also aligned with UN Sustainable Development Goals. Over the 5 days of this program, international trainers, Mr. Hubert Shasma, Dr. Shujat Mubarak, and well-known industry expert, professional from academia and industry will share their knowledge, expertise, and insight on logistic, supply chain management, and sustainability. Participants will engage in thought-provoking discussions and will take the advantage of networking opportunities over here. Ladies and gentlemen, there are different stakeholders of this event, and one of the key stakeholders is our sponsors. Here, I would like to thank our strategic partner, KGTL, Port Qasim Authority, Dubai Port World, Green Park Shipping, Telic Private Limited, Global Compact Network, Karachi International Container Terminal, South Asia Pakistan Terminal, Eva Foods, and Karachi Port Trust. Without their support, this event would not have reached this stage. I would like to also express my gratitude to our CAC members, particularly President of our CAC, Mia Zaid Hussain, Mr. Majid Aziz, and Mia Atikur Rahman Saab. We are grateful for their support and guidance. Ladies and gentlemen, success of this program is outcome of teamwork of different departments, including academics, finance, admin, marketing, and of course, IT department of Beharia University, Karachi campus. Above all, role of leadership has been truly decisive in whole process of this event. So I would like to a special, sincere gratitude to Honorable Rector of Bahria University and Honorable Director General, Karachi Campus. Sir, we are so grateful for your generous support, your guidance, and encouragement. Thank you very much. I also would like to thank Dr. Awais Mahmood, Director, International Office, Bahria University. Thank you for his contribution and coordination for this program. At the end, I would like to acknowledge dedicated faculty members and my HOD MS, Dr. Mubashir, and Dr. Motasim Tofail Billah and Dr. Mubashir, and also my dedicated faculty members, Professor Dr. Amir Feroz Shamsi, Mustigir Sehraman, Dr. Munazza, Mr. Sadid Ali, Atif Nazir, Dr. Mawra. We are so grateful for your tireless effort to organize and coordinate this event. At the end, I wish you all a productive, enriching, and memorable experience over here. Thank you.
With today's first talk by Hubert Schwarzma. Hubert is a seasoned academic affiliated with the Faculty of Technology at the Amsterdam University of Applied Sciences. He specializes in maritime trade, port management, and logistic innovations. Contributed both as a lecturer and as a research coach within AUAS applied research programs. His work focuses on bridging the gap between academic training and industry needs, particularly in the context of future-proof airport and seaport logistics. Schwarzma has played a pivotal role in mentoring student-led research projects, including strategic analyses of the Port of Amsterdam, where he guided teams in identifying operational inefficiencies and proposing sustainable logistic solutions. Internationally, he has served as a resource person for programs like the International Summer School on Maritime Trade and Logistics at Bahria University in Karachi, Pakistan. There he shared global perspectives on maritime sustainability, digital transformation, and regulatory compliances in port operations. I will now stop and allow Mr. Hubert Schwarzma to please come to the podium, and it's your time, 2 hours of talking to my audience.
It's good to be back, I would say. 5 years ago, 2021, it was the first edition of this summer school. After some preparations I had together with Dr. Awais in Islamabad and Dr. Asif here in Karachi, and they said to me, can you make a sort of a weekly program about the maritime industry? And I thought, oh, okay, I can do that. I had no idea what to expect. But due to Corona in 21, we were only able to do it via, I think it was Zoom or MS Teams. And then in 22, we did the second edition, and it was my first time to Karachi, my first time to Pakistan. And I was impressed by the audience, and I was impressed by all the ideas and thoughts that moves around here in Pakistan, and especially here in Karachi, and in the ports of Karachi and Port Qasim. And then we went on, and every year we had different topics, different thoughts and different ideas about the industry. And when I was preparing this edition, I also realized that even though we had all these different things, there are some challenges that are that the maritime industry as a whole in the world has to deal with, and they are still applicable. There are still challenges, whether that is in the Netherlands, where I come from, or here in Pakistan, or wherever in the world. Because the maritime industry is a global industry, it's an industry that's operating worldwide. whether it's only about the ships or the ports, or whether it's in a broader scene, talking about maritime logistics. So for this edition, the 5th edition, we had, or at least I have, 5 presentations, 5 sessions with you, and about, again, some different topics, but also things we already discussed in previous sessions. And I'd like to go through them, and today it's a sort of, you could say, introduction or an explanation about maritime trade and a little bit about maritime logistics, and the way I see it and the way the things are developing. It's not per se only for the situation here in Pakistan, but I think it's for the maritime industry as a whole. So maybe first, some, what's only there? Whoa. Okay, so when we're talking about maritime trade, maritime transport, what is it actually that we're talking about? A lot. 12.3 billion tons in 2023, and a growth of 2% in 2004. As you can see, there's a growth growth in global maritime trade, but even more there's a growth in what is called the production in ton miles. And ton miles is the unit that we use for if you transport 1 ton of cargo over a distance of 1 mile. And you can see that the growth in ton miles in 2023 was almost, well, not entirely, but almost twice as big as the growth in only in tons, so in weight. And the reason is that the distance, oh, it's even better. The distance between the distance traveled by that cargo is much longer. One of the reasons, for instance, is if you take container shipping these days, and of course one of the main trades is between Asia and Northwest Europe, or Europe. Normally they were traveling via Suez Canal, but due to the geopolitical situation with the Houthis in the Red Sea and in that area, a number of those shipping lines are no longer crossing the Suez Canal, but using the route via South Africa, which makes it much longer. For the years to come, the growth is expected to stay at 2 to 2.5%. And even though a lot of us are always talking and looking at container shipping, the increase of demand is, and so the growth in transport is mainly due to bulk, bauxite, coal, iron ore, grain, and still also oil. A number of things that comes along with that is infrastructure development, of course, new ports, hinterland connections, advanced technologies. We discussed that in the previous years, like artificial intelligence, Internet of Things, blockchain, and things like that. And of course, we need to move to a cleaner energy, which is a challenge because we all agree maybe to use ships who are running on methanol and hydrogen and maybe even ammonia or nuclear power, but we are still far away from that simply because there's a lot of things going on. We will come to that. We also see geopolitical tensions and an increase in bad weather due to the ongoing climate change. So if you take it from a longer period of time back to the 1970s, 60s, you can see the enormous growth in global trade, certainly in the last number of years. Again, an indication of the massive growth that we've seen throughout history. This is from 1950, 1948 till today. Whether that will continue, I really don't know, but it's still solid growth. Let me tell you where the growth comes from. This is from a study by a number of researchers, not only in Europe but also in China. And what explains the growth is the income growth we see, and this is from a global perspective. So income growth, an ever-increasing reduction of transport costs. If you think about 1950, 2025, it's also more or less similar with the emergence of the development of container shipping. So back in the 1950s, we were still dealing with what we call general cargo, but nowadays, of course, it's all transported and shipped in containers, which enormously reduce the transport cost. We have a trade liberalization, although we see the last 2-3 years, I think, a stronger shift towards protectionism, so maybe less trade liberalization. Economic convergence, and finally, increase of intermediate goods trade, which means a trade of goods which are not entirely finished. So there's more trade in as a whole. One thing I would like to address is global trade or maritime trade is always based on what we call demand and supply. I won't go into much detail. The important thing is that whereas the demand is volatile and quick to change, supply is not. I mean, when something happens, as you can see in the demand, number 4 is random shocks. If a war starts, or if we close the Suez Canal, which can be done almost like with a snap of the fingers, not entirely, but it can be something that happens, or let's say Corona, then the demand will either increase or decrease, whereas supply is ponderous and slow to change. If I decide to have new ships, it will take at least a number of years to have those ships operational. So who are involved? The main, I think you could say, stakeholders in maritime trade are liner companies, the ones who are operating the ships. Doesn't always mean that liner companies are always also the ones who own the ships. They can also charter ships, sometimes for a brief period of time, sometimes for longer, like 6 years, 10 years, whatever. Of course, there are those who own ships but do not operate the lines. There are around the world a number of ship owners who who you could say are in the asset management part of the industry. Then, of course, you need shipbuilders, and we need someone to finance those ships and the operation. Maritime shipping and international trade, you could say, then what does that comprise? What are the aspects of it, and how do they, you could say, how do they operate, or why are they there? I think shipping is, you could say, is sort of an engine of globalization. around 19%, 90 or 85% of international trade goes by ship. So it is indeed a very important one. And it is also a global industry. Even though we're not always aware of it because it's out of sight, but for instance, iron ore is mined in Australia and also in Brazil. But the demand for those goods or those raw materials is in China or in Europe or in the US or wherever, which does mean it has to be shipped over those long distances. So it is indeed a global industry because finally iron ore, we make steel out of it and steel is used in other places. So then you need to ship the steel, whether it is still in plates or whatever sort of intermediate product is around the world. It serves and it certainly helps in the growth of international trade, but also we see shifting of trade patterns. Some trade patterns are in the world for centuries or maybe even longer, but we also see different and we see shifts of trade patterns. I think the most important, well, certainly a revolution or a development that had a huge impact on shipping and maritime trade in the last 60, 70 years, of course, is containerization. It had such a huge impact on the industry. And not only on the shipping industry, but I think on global logistics around the world, because the container is also used in rail and road and barge transport, inland waterways. And so it's one of the biggest, I think, developments of the last 60, 70 years. But because it's a global industry, it also has to deal with the geopolitical situation, and of course the war in Ukraine. As I mentioned, the event with the ongoing tensions with the Houthis in Yemen, it has an impact. We also have to be aware that even though it's still maybe a question mark, what is going to happen with the Panama Canal is the United States or the current administration saying, okay, we're going to change that. And same is with, of course, the Suez Canal, because they are so important parts of this global network. And regulation. The industry is one of the most regulated industries in the world, and it's ever increasing, certainly with the climate change. So when it is the engine of globalization, as I said, backbone of global trade, it has a number of developments and advances through time. The trade costs, which have enormously reduced, as I stated, in the last 56 years, increased, I think, the volume and the growth of trade. And you can see point 4, how that correlates with each other. Huge growth. The share of trade in global domestic product has constantly grown. By almost five times. And this growth is also because of rising incomes, tariff reductions and improvements, and the rise of global value chains. and multinational firms. I mentioned already a few. The large sectors or the large parts of the maritime trade is containerized goods, dry bulk, wet bulk, oil, and then roll on, roll off, and break bulk. Roughly, I think dry bulk is around 30% and oil is around 25 or also 30%, and then containers is 50. So the largest segments of the maritime transport, maritime trade around the world is in dry and wet bulk, so raw materials, and not per se in containerized goods. That is in volume, because a lot of stuff that is shipped by containers are not that heavy, whereas iron ore and grain and oil and coal are all large volumes with a large weight. So it's around 90%, as I said, of global trade that goes by sea. In value, it's around 70%. There's an increasing share of global trade that goes by air. It also is because of these different segments that we have different service models or different arrangements. Also vessel types. If you have a bulk carrier, you can't use it for containers and vice versa. And of course you need a different infrastructure, terminals, port activities in order to load and discharge those vessels. Yes, it certainly is a revolution, and it has a massive impact, as I already said. Reduced cost, reshaped port operations, look at that, and the logistics architecture. Also mentioned Gaza, Ukraine, Houthi attacks, but also the opening of China have reshaped those trade pathways and port activity. When you look at international trade, World Trade Organization and UNCTAD are of course important. When you look at maritime trade, I would say it is, of course, first of all, the IMO, International Maritime Organization, which is part of the United Nations as well. And for instance, in Europe, we have what is called European Maritime Safety Agency, which has an impact on our industry, which it also makes complex because EMSA, European Maritime Safety Agency, and IMO are not always on the same level, which sometimes creates misunderstanding of things. That regulation pushes the industry. Something that started, I'm not sure entirely, but I think 10, 15 years ago was port state control, maybe longer, which is a control of ships when they enter the port. So it's something that is done by the port state. So wherever the ship comes from, when a ship enters a port, like here in Karachi or in Rotterdam, the port state, which is the national government, says we want to check that ship on a number of things, especially on emissions and safety. Now let's see if this works. Yeah. So, with regard to maritime and international trade, a few things. It is indispensable to globalization. It has shown a massive growth in the last 60, 70 years. we have seen differences and diversified of cargo types, for instance, due to containerization, and an industry that has to adapt to that. And we see institutions, technology, and geopolitics who are more and more having a big an effect or an influence on our industry. Yeah. Just a very quick historical slide, which is, if it works. Oh, one back. Yeah. And this goes back, what is it, 5,000 years. Now, I don't want to be an historian today, but just to give you an idea, it is an ever-increasing shift towards the West. So from the Med to the US, now into Asia, and let's see how that continues. And when you look at the last 500 years, and they have, you could say, the serious impact on our industry is Revolution 1 and 2 and 3. Let's have a quick. So, Industry 1, this is Venice back in the 15th century. You see different sort of ships. Then back in the 18th century, you saw those clippers who were bringing, for instance, tea and other stuff. And the first steam engines still using sail in the 19th century. It's not entirely working as I... Okay, so the first revolution... Building a global trade network, because what we nowadays think is as something that was ever there was the global trade network. It wasn't. So, where do I use this? Okay, was that the first revolution is that from very local markets and local business, it shifted towards a global trade network. So coastal trade to maritime trade network. So explorations back in the 15th and 16th century, Portuguese navigators who had no idea what to expect but who traveled the world. And also were able to use better navigational tools, and still bear in mind, up till the 18th century, we were not able to determine the longitude at sea, because you need time, and we didn't have a time instrument. So they had quite a good idea about the latitude of their vessel, but no idea the longitude. They didn't know where, crossing the Atlantic, how far away from Europe or how close to America. But they still went on. First of all, still with wind-powered ships, and then we also saw the progress in ocean mapping. So further increase in all the instruments and tools and books and charts required to make those trips. Then the second period, which is from the late 19th century till 1950s, these were former these big billboards of shipping lines in those days, from Indonesia and China, and the one on the right was the Dutch shipping line crossing the Atlantic. So that was the second revolution, which was shaped by steel ships, fossil fueled up till today, And we all of a sudden we also had, well, not all of a sudden, but we had communication. First, of course, with Morse codes, and nowadays, of course, with all the communication systems that we're using. But also a global and more structured network. This was the period where we started to have liner shipping. So ships which were calling the same ports in a sort of structured pattern, connecting different parts of the world. So you had a sort of global or a coastal network, and then connecting to another coastal network with ocean voyages. Liner and tram system. The tram system is, of course, more in bulk shipping, where you have, I call one port go to another, then go to another port and back to the first. So it's not this liner shipping structure. And these were most of the time national lines who were doing the cargo and, of course, also the mail. Whereas the tram were serving the seasonal and bulk trades. One of the things that was very important in these liner trade was conferences, which was a sort of, as it says, stabilized rates across colonial trade routes, improving coordination and predictability. However, later, up till I think late 90s, early this century, most of those conferences are no longer existing because it was also considered as a form of protectionism. And so, in the whole idea of a free open market, most of those conferences no longer exist. And of course, we finally left the sail area and into first in steam, coal, and then of course to heavy fuel oil diesel engines up till today. And then the third revolution, if it all works well, using these large vessels, an ever-increasing an ever-increasing in size and in networks. So since the 1950s up till today, what we see is multinational corporations who are now fueling the global trade, long distance and low cost. Further advancements in technology, diesel engines, radar, GPS, of course, and more large, but also very efficient and very specialized ships. The number of different ship types, well, these days is quite far. And for all sort of different cargoes, we develop different ships. I think in container shipping, you still have these very large shipping companies, liner companies. I think the top 10 in the world, so MSC from Italy and Maersk and CMA is from France, Maersk from Denmark, then COSCO from China, Hapag-Lloyd, Germany. But the top 10 of those container lines, I think, control around 80% of the business worldwide. So in container shipping, we've seen a huge decrease in the number of operators, the number of shipping lines. Whereas in bulk, it's sometimes, most of it is smaller companies with a very strong focus on cost. Container shipping, by the way, is also focusing on cost. But it's a different thing. There's quite a lot of companies in that area. Another development we've seen in this Revolution 3 or in the last decades is that a ship maybe is owned, so the ship is owned by an asset management somewhere around the globe, let's say country A. The operator is in country B. The ship is flagged in country C. It's chartered by a company in country D. So the number of participants or shareholders or stakeholders in such a construction is quite a lot, and it's not always all from the same country. Minimum crew, so what we call safe manning, but safe manning is actually a term that is to say, how can I reduce my number of people on board to the absolute minimum, which of course creates a risk with regard to safety. So what happens if someone gets sick or gets hurt? So it does have an impact on your safety, but also on your daily operation. But it's all because of to have and to emphasize the cheap operation and the quality. But what we became more aware of, but what also is the serious risk related to pollution, safety, and the lack of coordinated leadership in the industry. I was initially trained as a deck officer back in the 1980s, and I remember we had garbage on board. This was a general cargo vessel, and we were doing a liner service around the Pacific. So from Asia, Japan, and Singapore, Hong Kong, and Korea, and so on, and then crossing the Atlantic towards Central and Latin America. And we had a sort of daily job, which was we had garbage, the normal garbage you have at home from your kitchen and wherever, and we just threw it overboard, the plastic bags every day, just like that. And we said, oh, it doesn't matter, it's only one small bag, and this is a huge Pacific Ocean. But we all know that now, today, we are dealing with a massive plastic soup, as it is called, in the Pacific. I'm not saying it's only this garbage, there's a lot of things we've thrown into the sea. And in those days we said, who cares? Well, I think we should care every single day about it and seek technological developments in order to have that changed and not throw everything overboard. Pollution, safety, they have become extremely important aspects of the world, aspects of our business. What can we, when we look back, what can we say about these revolutions? They take time, decades, or even centuries. We used, so for instance, the global navigation revolution, 300 years, steam revolution, 150 in bulk, 65. So if you take that into consideration, 2050, we set, the IMO set the goal, Sustainable Development Goals, it was mentioned. 2050 we should have a zero emission maritime industry. That means 25 years. Now you can say 300, 150, 65, so maybe we see a sort of, it goes faster and faster, but I still have my doubts whether we really are able to have that by 2050. And there are, of course, a number of techno-economic drivers of change. It is complex, it's not an easy one. But you can say we have unit cargo cost, information, infrastructure, and transport systems. Those are the four building blocks of our maritime innovation. Managing change, a lot of you are here from the industry, we all know it. Managing change, well, it says traumatic, at least let's put it this way, it can be quite a challenge. Maybe sometimes it is traumatic. It's not always profitable. I mean, in order to shift from fossil fuel engines towards methanol, at least what I hear from ship owners is they say, yeah, well, it's all nice and dandy, but we know exactly the cost of our operation with fossil fuels. What will happen with if we move to hydrogen, methanol? It's all unknown, let alone that the infrastructure, the availability of these renewable energy sources around the globe is non-existent. Again, we already said we have the technology, the regulations, and the sustainability. I think those three are, when you say revolutions or what will determine the industry in the coming decades, maybe, are those three. And certainly sustainability is key.
The business is volatile, so we see there's freight volatility. Overcapacity. Sometimes shipping, I told you, demand is volatile and quick to change, whereas supply is ponderous and slow to change. So sometimes we see an increase in demand, more and more ships are required because trade growth, and then when the ships are finally delivered, maybe there's a little bit of a slow down in trade, and then we have overcapacity. So it's always there, you could say, running after each other, and it's extremely difficult to create that balance. That's something that's, despite geopolitical tensions or whatever, climate change will continue to determine. I think we already mentioned this, the regulations and the strong focus on the ever-increasing focus on decarbonization and the cost. Safety and crewing challenges, already mentioned that as well. Shortages, aging workforce, and not always the correct condition. I think that is yes, but it's not probably the biggest thing. We have in the Netherlands a project which was initiated 2 years ago, which is called the Maritime Master Plan, which aims to build a number of ships on methanol, hydrogen in the coming 10 years. And there's a national growth fund that has heavily invested in this project, around 200 million euros. But that's for a 10-year period. And it's based on the idea that different companies, so ship owners, ship builders, but also digital contractors who will deliver different digital systems, come together in order to make it happen. And one of the things is that the ability to invest indeed into our research and development or in digitalization sometimes is difficult. So hopefully with a project like this, we will see a sort of improvement or to come a step further to make these sort of things happen and to have ships who are more suited for the future. Number two is whether that applies to all, I don't know, but sometimes it is indeed you need to have not a 1 or 2 year horizon, but at least 10 years in this industry. As I told you, the revolutions or these changes in the industry will sometimes take decades, if not longer. And so with a 1 or 2 year investment horizon, that would not be a wise course to steer on. So he also mentioned it, and I think we already discussed it, but again, so it makes it clear that it also, Mr. Stopford, from an economic point of view, said integration across global player is uneven, but it's also not sufficient. So integration needs to take place. Cybersecurity is, I mean, if you increase your level of digitalization, there's always also the risk of cybersecurity, and it's not yet properly regulated. Yeah, if the ships get bigger, then not all ports in the world are able to deal with it, and also certainly in container shipping, we need inland connectivity. Am I able to make sure that my containers are not staying in ports, but also are shipped and transported to final destinations? So then it becomes a supply chain management thing. We are aware of it, the conflicts, which has an impact on our business. You would expect, I mentioned already, the IMO to be a sort of an industry leader in driving change in technology. One of my colleagues, I mentioned this update of the standards for training and certification for seafarers. One of my colleagues is representing the Netherlands in this update, which is a project of five years. I think that when he talks about it, maybe 50% of his time is with regard to the content. So what should be in the updated version of STCW in order to make it a proper new set of rules and regulations for seafarers. But the other 50% is diplomacy. So how do I, when we want something to happen, whether that is for the Netherlands or for Europe, but how can we, because there's 160 nations involved in the update of this set of rules and regulations. So how do I get 160 nations around the globe aligned and finally say, okay, this is our version? We need someone or an institution that will say, okay, this is the way forward. And I'm very well aware that when you talk about a global industry, that is extremely complex and difficult. But that's why I think also the report of Lloyd's Register shows us that it goes very slowly. It is because of these sort of issues. Also, we have different players with different interests, different demands, different views and visions. How much time do I have? 20?
40 minutes.
Oh, okay. So we showed you something like Register, Martin Stofford. The United Nations Conference on Trade and Development also said what is going on. Where are the things that we should have a look at? And they came up with, in their final review of maritime transport, which is a yearly review, a yearly report, freely available on the internet, the Untitled Review of Maritime Transport 2024. And they said in their summary, and then if you read the report, you can read everything. These are the 6 major components or major things that they observed and they analyzed. So they noticed that there is, and we start with that, there is a bit of a growth, 2.5% in 23, and then a further growth in 2024. And certainly that comes from dry bulk and containerized trade. And the good thing is that the disruptions that we noticed during and also after the pandemic caused by the COVID-19 virus are more or less solved. When you look at the freight rates, you have these sort of graphs, the freight rates, and you look at, for instance, container, you will see that before the pandemic, it was more or less a little bit stable. Of course, there are fluctuations. And then all of a sudden, in 21 and 22, we saw a massive increase. The rates went through the roof. And then in 23, it all came back to these pre-2020 levels. We are expanding the fleet. The total fleet, I think, when you say above 100 gross tonnage, is around 90,000 vessels. LNG fueled is increasing, which is a good thing. We see also larger vessels. I think the largest container vessels nowadays are 24,000 TEU. And certainly when you look at container shipping, there is this concentration of carriers, which of course creates concerns about competition. Yes, we are all aware of it, and there is war in Ukraine. I'm not sure whether the situation in Gaza has a big impact on trade. And the war in Ukraine and the Red Sea disruptions are much bigger disruptions. Yeah, the economic growth is a little bit, we have to see high interest rates. They've, of course, grown in the last couple of years, and how to deal with the inflation, and it all have an impact on our business. The last one is an interesting one, whether we see nearshoring and friendshoring are beginning to alter trade geography, whether we will see, and we've been, of course, offshoring all our industry to so production, of course, like we've seen since the 1970s, 80s towards China. Will we see a reverse? It will have an impact. That's for sure. Throughput recovered, but there are challenges. Digital infrastructure, logistic results. Digital infrastructure, by the way, is also something that I know from, to give you a very small example, Amsterdam and Rotterdam, there's always competition between those two. And I think in Rotterdam they had a system which is used for port communication between agencies, ship owners, cargo owners, and so on. And then that was in Rotterdam, and then Amsterdam said, no, we want to have our different system. And I said, why don't we have, if it's a workable and suitable system, why not have the same? So we also do have this challenge. There is an acceleration of investment, but as we've seen also from the report from the Lloyd's Register, it is accelerating, but still I think it's slow. There is digitalization and innovation. They are expanding, but again, they are not maybe as fast as we would expect or we would hope for. There is a transformation is required and is underway. Sustainability, technology, and shifting geopolitics. As we discussed, it is underway, but it's not as fast as maybe we wanted it to be, because it is. There are these complexities in order to have it underway. Finally, I would like to say something about, because up till now it was mainly about trade and maritime transport. Is maritime logistics, because the UNCTAD review and also the Lloyd's Register report, they are explicitly zooming in on maritime transport, so on the sea trade and sea transport. But it can only exist, these systems, if there is also something which is maritime logistics. You could say that is systematically managing the ocean movement of goods, but also information. In order to have your ocean movement of goods, you also need a flow of information. The aim of that is to be most effective and efficient, because you want to have that integrated into a logistics system. It's not only the transport, certainly you look at container shipping, not only the ship to contain from port A to B, but also to have it shipped all the way to the final destination, as well as to have it transported from the factory where it's produced to the port of loading. So to integrate it in a logistics system. So it covers the scope of maritime logistics is maritime transport, contracting and chartering of ships to make sure that the ships are there in order to make that happen. The sea voyage, loading and discharging in ports. So one aspect is maritime transport, but it's more than that. There's also the logistics. For instance, stuffing and swimming of containers, storage and warehousing of whether that is containers, but also raw materials. It includes inventory management. You could also say, I want to know, let's take an example, is the transport of iron ore from Brazil to China, which is shipped into ships which are the so-called Valomax, extremely large bulkheads. And I think between Brazil and China there is a number of ships on the way. So one ship is here and the other is a week further en route, and so on and so on. That is a sort of inventory management because the production of steel in China is based on this sort of managing the number of ships that are on the way. So you could say that's a sort of my inventory. Instead of having all the iron ore stacked or stored close to your steel mill, you have it on the way. So it's a sort of an inventory management. If it is indeed products, you need distribution, including distribution centers, where you have your containers stripped, but then for further transport to its final destination, you need these distribution centers. Quality control testing, sometimes even assembly. You can have a port, so it's part of maritime logistics. You have a port where we bring in different products, we assemble the whole thing, which then is a zone which is excluded from all sort of tax, and then you can deliver the final goods to its final destination. And of course, an important one is inland connections, interland connections. Shipping operations, port operations, intermodal logistics. These are the key components of the maritime logistics. So it's more than just the maritime transport. Yeah. There's freight forwarding, there's documentation, and finally, number 5, cargo flows and compliance. Of course, you need to be, when you have these maritime logistics or logistics in general, you need to be compliant to make sure that all the paperwork is correct. Why is it important? Because as we started, it's a global industry. We've seen with this third revolution that we have, or actually already started with the first revolution, we have a global system, global trade network which means global chains, supply chains, which these days are, of course, sometimes extremely complex. I haven't added it to this presentation, but if you have, there's this sort of drawing, which is the production of a pair of jeans. And when you see just the supply chain of a pair of jeans, which is not that complex kind of product, but the number of elements of transport, so sea transport for the production of just a pair of trousers is quite impressive. I have cotton, then the cotton is, then from the cotton we produce cloth, from the cloth we make somewhere else to make the jeans, but then we need the coloring of the cloth, we need buttons, all these other things, and it comes from all over the place. So these global supply chains are complex, and that's why maritime logistics is that important. And apparently it works well, or it is feasible, viable to have a supply chain set up like that. It's as we discussed, the cost of transport has reduced immensely in the last 50, 60 years, which then, of course, you could say justifies to say I get my stuff from all over the globe in order to make something. The effect, of course, is we have more transport, more moves of goods, which causes more emissions of greenhouse gases. are challenges, linking maritime trade, port congestion and infrastructure limitations. I think some of you will be much better to explain that to us, the difficulties of port congestion. But I think that is in many ports around the globe, and the infrastructure limitations. If I look at Rotterdam, the very large container terminals are now at what is called Maasvlakte 2. Maasvlakte 2 is a claimed land before the Dutch coast. So that's where the containers are discharged from all those large container vessels. And then we either use road, rail, or barge for further hinterland transport. But if you look at the road, it is one road from all the way, which is 80 kilometers west of Rotterdam. There's this highway that you have to use for further transport towards Germany, for instance. The road is traffic jam every single day, so infrastructure limitations. And then they said we are going to widen this road from 2 lanes I think to 4, but they know that by the time the road is operational, it's already too small. Impact on our environment and the increasing decarbonization pressure, it is a challenge. We discussed that. Geopolitical risks, supply chain disruption, and the compliance with global regulations. From the IMO, the International Maritime Organization, and two of the probably most important conventions with regard to maritime transport is Safe Atlantic Sea, SOLAS, and maritime pollution. Safety and pollution are key with regard to the challenges. And again, so also for maritime logistics, not really new things that are the emerging trends. Green corridors, as I said, we will come to that on Thursday. Decarbonization, digitalization, smart ports, which is more or less also related to digitalization, resilience and sustainability. These are emerging trends. So, more or less a similar conclusion. We are dealing with a complex and dynamic system. It's a system that changes. Sometimes it takes, as we discussed, a number of years, decades, or even centuries, but it is dynamic. There is a dynamic component in our industry, and it is underpinning the global economy. Sometimes fast, sometimes slow, sometimes more, sometimes less, but the trade volume does grow, and sustainability. No. Okay, I will be finished. So trade volume grows, and sustainability challenges will intensify, and because we need to move towards, evolve towards a greener, smarter, more integrated logistics solutions. I think that was it. Okay, there's some differences between maritime transport versus logistics. If you look at what is the concept, what is the focus on, and what is the managerial scope. However, as I discussed, generally I would say that sustainability and safety security will remain for both the important ones. If you take a closer look, you see that there is, maybe in the day-to-day business, there are some differences. And finally, I already mentioned that there are some key components in maritime logistics. It is, on the other hand, of course, also the value. Whether that value is to deliver a good service in maritime logistics, or the value is to preserve the seas and oceans and to make sure that we do that in a sustainable way. I think both should be on your radar. That is, I think, the challenge we have is to say, yes, we are in business and in industry, so we want to make a profit, we want to continue, we want to be successful, but we also have to be aware of the environment and sustainability. Just been told that I have to close. So that was my introduction. I know it was quite a long story. I tried to explain to you a little bit about what is going on in maritime trade and maritime logistics. I thought I would keep it a little bit on general levels, and not per se zooming in on the situation here or there, but what is the industry as a whole dealing with, the industry at large. And I think these things that I showed you are applicable for the industry, and that's where we have to look into in the years to come. Thank you.
Otherwise you will have time. Please, there's a question there.
Thank you very much for a very good session. I just wanted to ask that in the 1990s, United States was the advocate of free trade, and they initiated the free trade agreements, and there was some organization also in the United Nations to promote free trade. But now the United States has completely changed its perception, and there are trade barriers and tariffs. So how will that impact the shipping industry and the maritime logistics?
That's a good question. I think that correct, the US, of course, with all the tariffs, put enormous pressure on free trade, while they were also the initiator of free trade, one of the initiators of free trade. To be honest with you, not entirely sure what the effect will be, but that it will have an effect on global trade, that's for sure. As you know, Europe agreed with the US, I think last week, but that was just only on a high level. So the European Union and the US agreed on a trade deal, trade agreement, which I think includes 15% import tax for European goods. The thing, however, is it's only an agreement, sort of first draft version. So the next 12 months, the US and Europe have to come to terms in detail. And so the industry was asked, I saw it on the Dutch, 8 o'clock news. A small firm was asked who was exporting to the US. So what is the impact? And he said, I'm pretty sure it does have an impact, but I'm not entirely sure what it will be, whether we will see a drop of 10 or 15 or 20% in our exports. We don't know. But he was entirely sure it will have an impact. And I think that will be the case. If you are saying 15, 20, or these sort of tariff, these sort of barriers yeah. So let's say that, for instance, the review of maritime transport 2025 by the UNCTAD, which will be issued somewhere in 26, probably we'll see a different tone, and we'll see a different view on a number of things, and how far it will go. But I think it's a concern for us all. Yeah. So we have to see. Because the other thing is that we are depending on trade. As I told you, 90% of global trade goes by sea. If you put all these sort of these massive sort of barriers on a free trade, that will cause negative effects. Yeah.
Many companies are going to organizations because of the
Yeah.
maybe the shipping industry will
Yeah. Some will lose. It's a dynamic industry. So some will lose. Yeah. Unfortunately. No. Maybe by 29 we will see a new president, so maybe a different course. We'll see. We don't know. We survived. I mean, it's an industry that survived 5,000 years, so we will survive this one as well. But it's also an industry where we see companies, shipping companies going down. Yeah. Thank you.
Any more questions? We are surviving CMS.
So I have a question. You have mentioned the decarbonization of fuel shipping. The developing countries like Pakistan, how can we align these with the decarbonization of shipping in Pakistan? Second question is, what is the biggest cyber security threat to the shipping line and the port authorities in your perspective?
So the industry in Pakistan, the shipping industry, how can they be aligned to the decarbonization and setup that they have in Pakistan, and also cybersecurity for Pakistani businesses?
How to align with the decarbonization? It's a challenge. Look, I think I'll have a slide, not today, but in the coming days, where you can see what is the timeline for the coming years of this 2050 goal of zero emissions. And there are a few steps in it. The thing is, the IMO says, okay, this is our goal, but the IMO cannot force you to do something. They have no sort of jurisdiction in order to say, you Pakistan, or you India, or Netherlands, or whatever country. That is a national thing. So when you say, what is it that the maritime industry, the shipping industry in a nation should do, it is actually a question that you should ask this company to say, okay, if we want to be compliant with the goals that we've set, what is it that we're going to do? And as I told you, that, for instance, this Japanese company says, we're going to build ships, they are dual fuel, so they are already more or less lined up to become to use methanol or any other renewable energy, but up till, I don't know, we will move on. But we are somehow more or less, you could say, aligned with the goals. Whereas another company will say, we will see, we just build a ship, move on with fossil fuels, we have some systems which is called the scrubber, in order to reduce my emissions when I'm in certain areas. So like the North Sea, this is a sulfur emission-free zone, I think it's called. So when we're there, we have our systems to be compliant with the rules and regulations that are applicable here. So it's more or less up to the company itself to say, how do I align myself with the years to come? I know that the thing is that, let's say you have a fleet of 15 ships, and some of them are 5 years old, and 10 years old, and 15 years old. So the ships who are 5 years old, you might say, okay, I will do a retrofit. What is the refit? So I change my system because the ship will move on, can be used for another 20 years. Whereas a ship that's 15 or 20 years old, would you really do that? Because it's a huge investment, and the ship is only, operational for another 5 years. So, it's up to the shipping line, the shipping company, the ship owner to say, how will I do that? And there are different ways to do it, but that's because what sort of business model do you prefer? It is a big challenge, I fully agree.
Okay, we will cut. Sorry, keep your question with you because we are going to cut for tea and networking, and you can pose your question to him directly while you're networking. So हम चाय का ऑफर ही 11:30 बजे हम दोबारा यही मिलेंगे नेक्स्ट रिसोर्स पर्सन के साथ चाय के लिए जो रजिस्टर्ड पार्टिसिपेंट्स हैं और जो गेस्ट हैं वो फैकल्टी लाउंज में प्लीज चाय हमारे रिसोर्स पर्सन के साथ में फैकल्टी और स्टूडेंट्स जो हैं वो कैफेटेरिया तो 11:30 बजे वापस यहाँ for the next session. Thank you, and please pose your questions. You will be with us for 5 days, so many questions